He called his wife a loser and abandoned her for a younger woman, but regretted it too late. In the glossy world of social media and dinner parties, Daniel and Priya were the image of perfection. He, the sharply dressed corporate VP with a firm handshake and confident laugh. She, the graceful homemaker with kind eyes and an ever-present smile. Guests often commented on their chemistry, their history, their apparent love. People said they were lucky, an enviable match. But those people only saw what was allowed. At home, Priya lived in a different reality. Once a brilliant marketing executive, she'd stepped away from her rising career when Ava was born, believing in the dream of building a family with love at its core. But as the years passed, Daniel changed. Or perhaps he had always been this way, and she'd just stopped pretending. He criticized the way she dressed, telling her that her wardrobe looked tired just like her. He commented on her weight with a tone that pretended to be helpful but stung like a slap. "You used to take care of yourself," he'd mutter as he scrolled through his phone, not bothering to meet her eyes. Meals she cooked were met with lukewarm approval or passive-aggressive complaints. "Again with the lentils," he'd sigh. Her hobbies, reading, gardening, sketching, he labeled as a waste of time. Still, Priya stayed quiet. For Ava, she told herself. For the family. She tucked her hurt beneath soft smiles, convinced that love meant patience, that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. Some nights, she lay awake beside him, his back turned, staring at the ceiling and wondering when exactly love had become something she had to endure. And yet, every morning, she rose with purpose, packed Ava's lunch, and set another place at the table, trying to hold together the perfect illusion. Daniel first noticed Emma during a quarterly team meeting. She was seated in the back, taking notes with a kind of eagerness that felt rare in the corporate world. She was bright-eyed, quick-witted, and always ready with a clever remark that made the room chuckle, especially him. Over the next few weeks, she began appearing more often around his office, asking for advice, lingering just long enough for conversations to drift into personal territory. She laughed at all his jokes, even the dry, recycled ones Priya used to groan at. She told him he was brilliant, that he had a presence, commanding, she called it. Daniel hadn't felt noticed in years. Not like this. With Emma, he didn't feel middle-aged or tired. He felt invincible. Young again. Soon, his work hours stretched longer. Dinners were missed. Texts went unanswered. He told Priya the deals were taking longer to close, that the company was demanding. She didn't push. But she knew. A woman always knows. Then, one night, he simply didn't come home. She sat awake all night on the sofa, staring at the front door. When it finally opened, morning sunlight poured in behind him. He didn't look tired, just detached. "I'm done," he said flatly, without meeting her eyes. "You've become a loser. I want someone exciting." It wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration. The man she had once loved, who had fathered her child, who had once held her hand through childbirth, was now a stranger, cold, unapologetic, and already gone in every way that mattered. Daniel packed his things without ceremony. One suitcase, a few ties, and his favorite cologne. He didn't offer explanations or reassurances. No goodbye hug for Ava, just a half-hearted promise to see her soon. By the end of the week, he was living in a sleek downtown apartment with Emma, posting filtered photos of rooftop dinners and gym selfies like a man reborn. Back at home, Priya stood in the wreckage of their life. The silence was deafening. Bills arrived like clockwork: electricity, phone, credit cards, the mortgage. She hadn't worked in over a decade. The savings account they'd built together was suddenly locked. The joint account had been drained days before he left. Ava, only 12, asked few questions. She could feel the tension in the walls. Priya smiled when her daughter looked, but the cracks ran deep. At night, she cried in the shower, muffling the sobs under rushing water. During the day, she rationed milk, stretched rice, and quietly sold her wedding jewelry at a pawn shop to buy groceries. The gold bangles her mother had gifted her on her wedding day were gone in exchange for supermarket basics. Her parents called and offered to bring her home, to help her rebuild. But Priya declined. Going back would feel like surrender. She had spent too long letting someone else define her worth. Now, stripped of security, pride, and illusion, She was left only with herself, and that had to be enough. One morning, standing in front of the mirror, her face bare and eyes red but steady, she whispered to her reflection, "You're not a loser." For the first time in years, she believed it. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to take the first step. Enough to survive. The first few weeks were shaky. Priya barely knew how to navigate the freelance world, let alone price her work. But she remembered she'd once been good, exceptional even, before she gave it all up. Marketing had been her world. Now, with a laptop she bought using the last of her savings, she enrolled in an online graphic design course. She studied late into the night, after Ava went to bed, learning software she'd never used and watching tutorials until her eyes burned. At first, she took on small jobs, designing flyers for local events, social media banners for a friend's salon. The pay was modest, but each successful delivery gave her a tiny burst of confidence. Slowly, her skills sharpened. She created a portfolio and joined online platforms where clients started to notice her clean, elegant aesthetic. She changed her routine. Mornings began with brisk walks through the neighborhood, the cold air waking something inside her she thought was long dead. She swapped out comfort food for fresh produce, more out of necessity than discipline. She lost a little weight, but more importantly, she started feeling lighter. One day, on a whim, she colored her hair a deep burgundy. When Ava saw it, she stared for a second, wide-eyed. "You look happy, Mom." Priya smiled, a real, unforced smile. "I think I am." Weeks later, a tech startup contacted her. They'd seen her branding work for a client and wanted her to redesign their entire visual identity. The deal was generous. After one successful campaign, they offered her a permanent remote position. For the first time in over a decade, her bank account began to grow instead of shrink. The late fees stopped. The fridge stayed full. And in her chest, something bloomed, a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. Daniel's new life within it began like a fantasy, wine on the balcony, spontaneous getaways, and selfies that made him feel envied. She called him her silver fox, giggled at his dry jokes, and clung to his arm like a prize. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. MIA was addicted to her phone. Even at dinner, her eyes stayed locked on the screen, fingers flying as she messaged, posted, and scrolled. She recorded every moment, not to savor it, but to curate a life for followers. "Babe, move out of the shot," she'd say while posing with her smoothie or lighting just right for a story. When he wanted to talk about his day, she barely listened. She began making demands, designer clothes, weekend trips, the latest phone upgrades, all charged to his account. When he hesitated, she rolled her eyes and snapped, "What's the point of dating an older man if you're going to act broke?" She mocked his classic rock playlist, called his music dad vibes, and laughed about his thinning hair during a livestream, as if he weren't in the next room. He started to feel old, not wiser or accomplished, just tired and irrelevant. Then came the night she didn't come home. 3 days passed. No explanation. No calls returned. When she finally walked in, she offered a distracted excuse about a girl's trip and claimed her phone died. But Daniel saw the flurry of notifications, messages from unknown names with flirtatious previews. She didn't even bother hiding them. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been played. The manila envelope arrived on a dull Wednesday afternoon, dropped at the concierge desk of Daniel's building. Inside were neatly typed divorce papers and a letter from Priya's attorney. No note from her. No emotion. Just facts, terms, deadlines. He chuckled bitterly as he flipped through the pages, muttering, "She's bluffing." He dialed her number out of habit, expecting to hear her soft voice hesitate, maybe cry, maybe beg for civility, for reconciliation. The call rang out. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. That night, after MIA fell asleep, he opened his laptop and sent Priya a long, carefully worded email. Half apology, half request to talk. He told her they should settle this like adults, that there was no need to involve lawyers. He waited all night for a reply. The next morning, it came. A single sentence. "My lawyer will handle everything." No Daniel. No sign-off. Just business. He stared at the screen, his chest hollow. This wasn't the Priya he remembered, timid, soft-spoken, always trying to keep the peace. This woman was composed, unyielding, powerful. Somehow, that scared him more than her tears ever had. For the first time since leaving, Daniel realized something that made him uneasy. She didn't need him anymore. The manila envelope arrived on a dull Wednesday afternoon, dropped at the concierge desk of Daniel's building. Inside were neatly typed divorce papers and a letter from Priya's attorney. No note from her. No emotion. Just facts, terms, deadlines. He chuckled bitterly as he flipped through the pages, muttering, "She's bluffing." He dialed her number out of habit, expecting to hear her soft voice hesitate, maybe cry, maybe beg for civility, for reconciliation. The call rang out. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. That night, after MIA fell asleep, he opened his laptop and sent Priya a long, carefully worded email. Half apology, half request to talk. He told her they should settle this like adults, that there was no need to involve lawyers. He waited all night for a reply. The next morning, it came. A single sentence. My lawyer will handle everything. No Daniel. No sign-off. Just business. He stared at the screen, his chest hollow. This wasn't the Priya he remembered, timid, soft-spoken, always trying to keep the peace. This woman was composed, unyielding, powerful. Somehow, that scared him more than her tears ever had. For the first time since leaving, Daniel realized something that made him uneasy. She didn't need him anymore. The gala was held at a high-rise ballroom, sparkling with chandeliers and awash in the warm hum of jazz and champagne chatter. Daniel arrived in his tailored suit, nodding to colleagues, making small talk that felt increasingly hollow. His company had sponsored part of the event, and he was expected to network, to charm. But his mind was elsewhere, fogged with stress, fatigue, and lately, a gnawing sense of discontent. Then he saw her. Across the room, standing beneath soft golden lighting, was Priya. She wore a crimson dress that curved elegantly at the waist, her hair swept up to reveal the lines of her neck and a quiet confidence in her posture that stole his breath. Her eyes were bright, her smile genuine. She looked happy, not pretending, not surviving. She was speaking with a man, tall, composed, the CEO of a rival firm. Daniel recognized him, but couldn't remember his name. What he couldn't ignore was the man's hand resting gently at the small of Priya's back. Familiar. Intimate. Daniel's stomach twisted. He turned away before anyone could see his face and excused himself from the nearest conversation. He left the gala before dinner was served, without explanation. Alone in his apartment, he poured himself a drink, then another, then sat on the floor beside the couch, scrolling through old photos of their family vacations, holidays, candid moments he'd once dismissed. There she was, laughing in the snow, holding baby Ava, asleep beside him on the couch. What had he done? His thumb hovered over a photo of their anniversary dinner from years ago. She had looked at him that night like he was her whole world. Now, she didn't even look at him at all. He whispered into the silence, "What did I do?" The phone rang late in the evening. Priya was finishing dishes when she saw his name flash on the screen. For a moment, her thumb hovered over the decline button. But something inside her, curiosity, closure, habit, made her answer. "Hello." There was a pause, and then his voice, hoarse, uncertain. "Priya, I messed up. Can we talk?" She leaned against the counter, steadying her breath. "About Ava? Or about your regrets?" He hesitated. "Both, I guess. Mostly, I want to fix this." A silence stretched between them. She stared out the window, the lights of the city blinking back at her like a constellation of choices. "You called me a loser," she said, softly but firmly. "That doesn't go away." "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," she interrupted, not unkindly. "And maybe you still do. But it doesn't matter anymore." Before he could respond, she ended the call. Daniel stood alone in the dark, the dial tone ringing in his ears like a sentence. He sank to the edge of his bed, head in hands. For the first time in years, years of pride, mistakes, and delusion, he wept. Not for what he lost, but for how blindly he'd thrown it away. It ended with a TikTok. Emmy, glowing under ring light, lip-synced to a trending audio about leveling up while captions floated across the screen. P. You dated an old rich guy for the lifestyle, but he caught feelings. The comments exploded. Laughing emojis, fire icons, hashtags tagging Daniel's name and company. Within hours, it was everywhere. At the office, no one spoke to him directly, but the whispers were constant. People glanced at him in elevators, exchanged knowing smirks during meetings. The board summoned him for an informal conversation about professionalism and brand image. His authority, once unchallenged, now felt brittle, like glass under pressure. MIA was gone. Not even a phone call. Just a video and silence. Daniel sat in his sleek apartment, stripped of illusion. No MIA. No Priya. Not even Ava, who had grown distant and cold. All that remained was a man alone, with a title no longer respected and a self no longer recognizable. The auditorium was filled with proud families and echoing applause as rows of students filed in, caps and gowns fluttering like a sea of ambition. Ava stood tall at the podium, delivering her valedictorian speech with poise and quiet fire. She spoke of resilience, of second chances, of strength learned at home. Priya sat in the front row, tears in her eyes, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the man beside her, Dr. Shah, Ava's longtime mentor and, quietly, the steady presence in Priya's life for the past few years. He clapped with warm, open pride. Daniel sat several rows back, mostly unnoticed. Time had softened his edges and deepened his regret. He watched as Ava concluded her speech, her voice unwavering. My greatest lessons didn't come from school. They came from the woman who refused to break. After the ceremony, Ava ran down the steps straight into Priya's arms. The hug was long and fierce, filled with tears and laughter. Daniel approached slowly, hands in his pockets. Ava turned, smiled politely, and gave him a brief hug, cool, controlled. Thanks for coming, Dad. He nodded, forcing a smile. Before he could say more, she turned back to her mother and added, She made me who I am. Daniel's smile faltered as he stood there, invisible in plain sight. The applause had faded. The music was over. All that remained was the echo of words he could never take back, and the unshakable truth. The legacy he failed to build had already been rewritten without him. Daniel sat at his desk late into the night, pen trembling slightly in his hand as he stared at the blank sheet of paper. No keyboard, no spell check, just ink and honesty. He began writing, slower than he expected, unsure how to fit years of damage into a few pages. He told her everything. The affair with Emmy, the vanity that blinded him, the emptiness he chased until it consumed him. He wrote about the moment he saw her at the gala, how radiant she looked, how powerful. How wrong he'd been. I called you a loser, he wrote. But I see now, you were never the weak one. I was. You are the strongest person I've ever known. He confessed the shame he lived with daily, the regret that woke him in the middle of the night and sat with him in the silence of his mornings. There was no apology grand enough, but still he tried to offer one with each word, each line of his shaky handwriting. He ended with a quiet plea. If I could go back, I'd never leave. But I know I don't deserve that chance. I only hope you found happiness. You earned it. He signed it simply, Daniel. Then he folded the letter, sealed the envelope, and dropped it into the mailbox, hoping she would read it, knowing it might be too late. A week later, a white envelope arrived at Daniel's doorstep. No return address, just his name written in careful, familiar handwriting. He opened it slowly, hands slightly trembling, heart lodged in his throat. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No flowery language. No anger. Just clarity. Thank you for the letter. I forgave you the day I stopped needing your apology. I've built a life I love. I wish you healing. But I'm not looking back. There was no signature beyond one word at the bottom, Priya. Daniel read it once. Then again. The finality of it settled deep into his bones. Not cruel. Not bitter. Just done. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't hate. It was peace. And he knew, more than ever, that he was no longer a part of her story. Not because she couldn't forgive him, but because she'd outgrown the pain he left behind. Rain tapped against the cafe window in a slow, rhythmic pattern as Daniel sat alone by the glass, nursing a cold coffee he had barely touched. The table in front of him still bore the faint scratches from years ago, when this was their favorite Sunday spot, he and Priya, laughing over pastries while Ava colored napkins with crayon. It felt like a lifetime ago. He was about to signal for the check when something caught his eye across the street. There she was. Priya, holding an umbrella in one hand and Dr. Shah's arm in the other. They stopped beneath the awning of a bookstore, both smiling at something Ava said as she joined them, dressed in a sleek coat and holding her mother's other arm. The three of them looked full. Content. Like a family. A whole one. Daniel didn't wave. Didn't move. He just watched. No one looked in his direction. He stared at them for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a creased photo, him, Priya, and baby Ava on a beach, mid-laugh, wind in their hair. A moment when everything still felt possible. He stared at it, then slowly tucked it back into his jacket. He stood, left cash on the table, and walked out into the rain without opening his umbrella. The cold drops hit his skin, but he didn't flinch. He just walked. Some regrets don't end with redemption. Some stories don't offer second chances. And some endings come not with a grand gesture, but with quiet truth settling in your bones. She was never the loser. You were.